Hi everyone, this is Paul here from the Magdalene Centre. Today I'm doing the astrology report for the full moon in Aries, which is on the 25th of September at 2:52 AM Universal Time, which translates as 3:52 here in the UK, with the clocks being forward an hour. And I'll be outlining some of the key aspects and themes this particular full moon involves. Before I do that though, I just want to clarify, as I always do, that the astrology doesn't control our lives. It merely gives us an understanding or a context for what's unfolding around us. But for us to be able to actually interact with the energies constructively, we have to remain grounded and present here on Earth, because what's going on above is reflected around us. So for us to connect with it properly, we need to be grounded and rooted in the Earth. Otherwise, the energy usually passes by and nothing actually changes. Now, in terms of the full moon, obviously it involves the Sun in Libra opposed Moon in Aries. So this particular combination with Sun setting a month-long theme of focusing on developing peace, internal balance, and learning to acknowledge our own shadow in our day-to-day interactions and to own it and embrace it as part of who we are. And it's also about cultivating things like tact, diplomacy, and peaceful interactions within one-to-one relationships, whether they be friendships, romantic partners, spouses, business partners, anything that's comes under the umbrella of partnership. It's a time for working on developing diplomacy and tact and seeing where can we achieve more through working together than we can achieve individually. But one of the downsides of Libra is it can become very indecisive because it's about trying to see both sides of a situation, and if we're not careful we can also end up engaging in people pleasing, so we lose sight of who we are. So this is where the full moon in Aries brings, so the moon is highlighting the Aryan side to us. It reminds us that if we want relationships to be balanced and healthy and to benefit both parties, then we need to remain true to who we are in the process. It's important that we have the ability to compromise and listen to both sides and both people's needs and find a solution that helps both sides. But if we're not careful, we can end up giving away or ignoring our own personal needs and just going along with what will keep the peace at the expense of ourselves. So the full moon in Aries reminds us that if we want truly healthy dynamics, then we need to stay true to who we are in the process. We need to make sure that our own personal needs are honoured and our own sense of self is respected, whilst obviously ensuring that we're respectful of the other person's needs and that we honour who they are as well. This is also the harvest moon, so we're looking at the culmination of what was planted in spring, and in particular when we had the new moon in Aries on the 16th of April, we're now looking at the end result of it. So what are we harvesting? What are we finding, or what's been the end results of the actions that we've taken? How well have the goals we set for ourselves worked out? Did we remember to keep taking action, or have certain projects that we started in spring just aborted partway through because we stopped taking any action to sustain it? And where goals have followed through to completion, what can we learn from it? What wisdom can we gain from the process? And what, based on the wisdom that we've gained, what new choices do we now need to make at the beginning of the new season? This time of year for the Northern Hemisphere is more about the inward journey now. The light levels are diminishing, so everything in nature is naturally starting to power down for the winter, whereas in the Southern Hemisphere it's the opposite. Everything's starting to power up, ready for spring there. So depending on where we are in the world, we'll either be looking to power down and going on the internal journey, or if we're in the Southern Hemisphere, it's going on the external side of the journey. Now, there's a lot of aspects to this particular full moon as well. The ruler of the full moon is Mars, who rules Aries, and Mars is in a trine to the Sun and sextile to the moon, with Mars in Aquarius at the moment, and, conjunct the South Node. So what we're looking at here is, seeing, because Mars in Aquarius brings the need to transform our actions and desires through understanding how we're interconnected with everything else. So we need to make sure that our actions are going to be beneficial not just for ourselves but for our wider communities, and it's looking to transform it so that our actions are guided by higher truths and a more all-encompassing worldview rather than just the narrow lens of egoic desire. And with it being directly linked to the full moon, it gives us an opportunity to see where the actions that were taken in March and April when the sun was in Aries, how have they ultimately come about, how have they manifested, and how do we then need to change our actions and desires based on what went well and what didn't go well, so that in future, if we really want to achieve something, we maintain the desire or the concentrated action towards that goal, so that we don't end up aborting part way through. Now, another key player at this particular full moon is going to be Chiron in Aries. Chiron will be moving into Pisces the next day, but Chiron is highlighting the wound in Aries, which is the wound to the ego, the wound to the I am, and it highlights where do we struggle with having a sense of self-identity, or where do we feel that we would deny the opportunity to develop a sense of self-identity. And it's paying very close attention to what words we usually use after the words I am, because Aries rules I am consciousness. It's about those identity statements, but we need to pay very close attention to what we say after the words I am, because whatever word we put there has the power to mould our own sense of who we are and our own consciousness. So at this time, with Chiron in connection with the moon as well, we're also looking at the wound to the emotions, if you like, or where do we struggle to feel nurtured? Where do we feel like we weren't given the nurturing that we needed? Where do we feel like our own spark of consciousness wasn't honoured by the people, or we weren't taught how to develop self-awareness, we weren't given the opportunity to develop our own unique sense of self, we felt pressure to be how we were conditioned to be rather than honouring who we are. So during this time, if we encounter, this is around about the midpoint of the Chiron retrograde as well, so it's take that time to slow down, get grounded, and pay close attention to how comfortable we are being who we are, how well do we actually know ourselves, how clear an idea of who we are do we actually have. Another fairly heavy hitter to this particular full moon is going to be a combination of Saturn and Vesta in Capricorn square to the full moon. This particular, with Saturn in Capricorn, it's that challenge of making sure that we maintain our integrity throughout. We have to, whatever goes on between self and other, we need to maintain integrity, and it reminds us that any goal worthwhile, if a relationship is going to be healthy in the long run, it requires hard work. It requires that we invest our time and energy. If not, the relationship isn't going to be particularly balanced, and if we're not doing things truthfully and maintaining our own personal integrity in the process, then other people aren't really going to know who we are actually. They're just going to see who we pretend to be. But if we want to, and especially Vesta in Capricorn as well, Vesta is all about that personal integrity, of that devotion to oneself and to staying true to oneself. This square to the sun and moon highlights where we need to develop, in terms of the relationship to the sun, where we struggle to either we struggle to find fulfillment in work because we don't really know what will actually fulfill us, in which case we need to figure out what vision we actually want to create and then take the actions necessary to fulfill that vision. With the square to the moon, it's where do we have a tendency to become alienated from our own emotional needs? Where do we suppress our own emotional needs, and to the point that we struggle to connect with other people properly, or we don't know how to relate in a healthy way, and we isolate ourselves. So, but if we remember to connect with our emotions, to honour them and release them so they're not pent up behind a brick wall, if you like, we can let go of any emotional issues from the past. We can let go of these fears, especially things like fears of rejection. And if we have this disciplined approach where we recognise the need to have self-discipline, have patience, have self-control, and develop perseverance towards our goals, then we can achieve the goals we set for ourselves. We can achieve a sense of fulfillment where we're interacting healthy with other people, we're in touch with our emotions, and we have a clear idea of what we actually want to create, and then we have the courage and the discipline and tenacity to fulfill those and keep pursuing it. And the last aspect I want to, in fact, no, there's also got Mercury's going to be loosely conjunct the Sun here, so opposed the Moon. This natural opposition between Mercury and the Moon at the full moon is part of the reason why people seem to be struggling to, or quite often we seem to struggle with emotions, or where emotions seem almost irrational, is because the rational mind and the non-rational, i.e. the emotional side of the Moon, which is more intuitive, are opposed to one another. But if we can remember to be grounded and allow both sides equal expression, then we're less likely to be overwhelmed by emotions because we're not projecting them onto other situations, and we maintain a connection between the emotions and the intellect so that we can keep both sides naturally balanced. And with the Mercury so close to the Sun at the moment, this is also highlights strengthening the Libran side of things, where it's the need to make sure that we achieve a balanced perspective intellectually, that we actively seek out both sides of an argument, that we try to see both sides of the situation, because only by acknowledging both sides and honouring them equally that a truly balanced and wise decision can be made, because we're dealing with the whole truth now rather than just what we feel comfortable with, or what we want to establish as the truth, or what we want to believe at the expense of other truths which may be necessary for us to actually see what change we need to make in life. The last aspect is that Uranus in Taurus retrograde is in conjunct the Sun and semi-sextile the Moon. This further highlights to us the need to undergo that transformation of self through recognising or strengthening our own sense of self-worth independent of other people's evaluations of us. It's recognising that each and every one of us has our own innate worth, our own innate value, that's not dependent on financial and monetary value. It's not dependent on the assessment of other people. But it's also recognising where the resources that we need to take the next steps in our journey are already within us, but we have to take that inward journey. We have to unlock these inner resources and inner skills and then master them so that we can more wisely use the resources around us. And it's seeing how can we make sure that we pursue things, or we seek to create resources in natural alignment with the natural cycles of life. So rather than trying to fight against Earth's natural rhythms, it's getting grounded and aligned with these organic cycles, because by doing that we reduce the levels of stress that we unnecessarily create for ourselves. We're no longer trying to fight the natural rhythm of things. By going with the flow and trusting that whatever resources that we need will either emerge from within us, or we'll find a way to obtain those resources, this then gives us that necessary creativity and ability to see new opportunities that we may not have spotted before, and use these to create a new future. With it being in conjunct with Sun in Libra, this is also challenging us to stay true to who we are and make sure that we use our own resources wisely, but it's also learning to share the resources that we have and channel them into cooperative movements and cooperative ventures, if you like, because by working together and sharing the resources that we have, we can achieve much more with less. So we use much less energy intensive ways to do things. We find it's kind of like the whole work smarter. If we can work together in a spirit of cooperation rather than constantly hoarding our own stuff when most of the time we don't actually need it, if we share what we have, then usually we find there's actually more than enough to go around, and by sharing it we can achieve more with less. But the fundamental thrust of this particular full moon is reflecting back over the last 6 months and observe the end results of what we started back then, the seeds we sowed, and if things haven't materialised, we evaluate why and learn whatever lessons we have from there. If they have, assess how well have they achieved, which things went well, how can we do things differently in the future, and then we take the seeds of the potentials that we've garnered from what were planted at the start of the year, and we prepare ourselves for next year, for when we do the next cycle of external growth. But in nature, in the realm of relationships, which is the natural opposition between Aries and Libra, it's observing where do we need to assert our own needs in relationships, because we have a tendency to ignore our own needs to keep the peace. Where can we achieve a more balanced and mutually beneficial dynamic between people, so that our truth is honoured and so is the other person's, and both people receive equal respect and both are honest with one another. And if we can also use this time to see what is being mirrored to us from other people, what aspects of ourselves have we been projecting onto other people, and instead recognise that they are things that we're projecting and it's not just the other person, and take that inward journey of balancing to or staying true to who we are, but recognising where we need to soften up, become more diplomatic and tactful in how we communicate, and to make sure that we do things in an attitude of cooperation and harmony rather than always competing with one another. A bit of competition can be healthy from time to time, because sometimes that can spur innovation, but if we don't also maintain a spirit of cooperation and we keep trying to do things our own way or go our own way, there comes a point where we hit a natural limit as to what we can achieve, and it's only by being prepared to work with other people and break down the need to compete and try and be better than someone else. If we work in harmony with one another and a willingness to operate as a team rather than as a bunch of individuals, then we unlock the power of synergy. We recognise that fundamental truth that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and when we work together, synergy comes about, and we can achieve so much more collectively than we can do as individuals. But we first have to break down the egoic barriers that stop us from connecting with one another and lead us to project our issues onto each other rather than owning it, making peace within ourselves, so that we can then work in a spirit of ease and mutuality in our relationships, where we're being honoured and respected and we honour and respect the other person as well, and we end up with a giving and receiving dynamic rather than the constant trying to manipulate each other for the resources that we need. If we willingly share instead and identify how we can do things better together rather than as separate individuals, then there's so much more that we can all achieve. But it's up to each and every one of us to take this journey. None of us, the astrology doesn't force things to happen to us. If we're not prepared to work with the astrology, if we're not prepared to learn anything from it, then nothing's actually going to change. Things just keep going to go as they are, and we're just going to keep rendering the same results every time, because if the actions aren't changed, then the results will always stay the same. But if we use this opportunity to observe whatever wisdom we've gained from the last 6 months and transform our actions based on the wisdom that we've gained, by recognising where we need to change things, where things can be done differently, and where we can make sure our actions are now guided by wisdom rather than naivety. So I hope that's a useful guide for the full moon in Aries. There's a lot to take on board, and this is a very powerful full moon, so it's very important that we remain grounded throughout. But for me personally, I find being in nature, I'm here at the allotment, for example, and working here, working with the earth and spending time in nature helps me to naturally connect with the cycles unfolding above. If we all work with the natural cycles, then we naturally align with the astrology anyway. but it's up to each and every one of us to cultivate that connection with the earth and to become grounded and centered individuals, rather than either dismissing everything that we don't understand or wafting around in a spiritual bubble. Neither approach works, but for us to truly move with the astrology, we have to be grounded and connected with the earth to begin with. Otherwise, nothing will actually change. Everything will just be mental concepts, but we don't actually identify what practical actions need to be taken here on terra firma, and nothing will actually change. If we do connect with the natural cycles though, and we do open ourselves up to the wisdom available through working with nature and through paying attention to how our spirit responds to the natural cycles, we then naturally align with the above. So that's use of guide for the full moon in Libra. I hope it brings you many insights and presents new opportunities and choices to empower the next stage of your journey. And I hope the next stage of your journey brings a greater degree of wholeness within and mutual balance within relationships without. So may this full moon bring you many blessings. Take care.